Hi everyone, welcome to Cloud Rangers Microsoft Azure training. As you know, I'm Sean Ismail, a Microsoft Azure MVP, and there below is my contact information, email, Twitter, blog, LinkedIn, YouTube, as well as where the slides will be posted. So today is part 3 of Azure Recovery Services. I suggest you go and view part 1 and part 2 if you haven't already, and the links for that will be in the description of this video. Today we are going to talk about Azure Backup Server. Now, just to give you a little bit of information of Azure Backup Server, it's similar to Microsoft System Center Data Protection Manager. So there's a lot of things that overlaps between these two, and it's a new offering from Microsoft Azure Backup Server. So in the demo, I'm planning not to go into too much details about the actual component, which is a lot like DPM. Don't get me wrong, I'm going to have a end-to-end video to get you started, oriented, and actually perform a backup, even a recovery in the end. But initially, when I thought I'm going to do this, I planned that I'm definitely not going to get into super details because Azure doesn't, and definitely 7533 doesn't as well. But you need to know this for your exam, how to do this. And if you are doing this just to learn to do this in production, this will be very beneficial for you as well. And you'll understand what I mean because a lot of things over here, the documentation is not even there for Azure. And the reason behind that is that Azure says, hey, this looks a lot like Azure System Center DPM or Data Protection Manager, so go get your information from there. And that's perfectly fine. For people who are using Microsoft's DPM for on-premises backup, you will be right at home. For people who are doing something else like Commvault or Tivoli or something else, different offering from others, you'll find it's similar, but obviously the console and everything is a little bit different. Okay, so let's get started. And once we get started, I'll get into those points and I'll show you what I really mean. So to get started, Microsoft Azure Backup Server, or MABS or MABS, I guess, it can protect application workloads. So all this time, the things that we have talked about in the first 3 parts, we have never really went and did some workloads like SQL Server, SharePoint Server, Exchange Server. All we did was file and folder level backups. We did backups for the virtual machines, but there might be in your organization a need for application workloads, like you want to backup SQL database or Exchange mailbox, or you know other other things like in a more brick level, or uh, more application level, like we used to call it. And that's what Azure Backup Server will do. You might already have an on-premise solution which is doing this today with, like I mentioned, the Azure Data Protection Manager (DPM) or Commvault, or any other IBM's whatever solution they have out there, and you can do that today. But you might have a need of for doing this on the cloud. So from the Azure portal, there's no way you can do these application workloads backups today. So for that, you need Azure Backup Server, and it's an offering that you can download for free and install, and you don't need a System Center license for doing that, as we will see. So yeah, it can protect workloads like your Hyper-V VMs, your VMware VMs actually as well, SQL Server, SharePoint Server, Microsoft Exchange, and things like that. Azure Backup Server inherits the functionality of a data protection manager for workload backup. So it inherits in the sense that it's a server that almost looks like DPM. When we install this, you will see the console. If you are already using DPM in your organization, you'll see it's almost similar. In fact, they probably just went in, took the same code base, and changed and made it more cloud friendly, made it more directly integrated with the cloud. In general, it's said that DPM and Azure Backup Server, they generally yield the same results, okay? So they can both do similar stuff. But then Azure Backup Server offers the same management interface as the DPM. So if you're coming from a data protection manager on premises, this will almost seem like you're at home. You can do everything like protection groups and everything else similar way. So Azure Backup Server, it also provides an enterprise-grade protection without the System Center licenses. So if you are using DPM on premises, you need System Center licenses to do that. With Microsoft Azure Backup Server, you don't need those licenses. Okay. And Azure Backup Servers can be installed in Azure for cloud workloads or on premises for on premises workloads. So When I initially started with this, it was a little tricky for me to understand what I mean by it can be installed in Azure or on premises for different workloads. So turns out if you want to use Azure Backup Server, you can actually use it, I mean, you can install it both in Azure Virtual Machine or on your on premises. And the reason to actually do that is because let's say you want to use your on-premises virtual machine backups, you want to do files and folders, you want to do your SQL backup on premises, you will have to install this backup server on a virtual machine or a physical machine on your on premises. Why would you do that? Well, you do that to take advantage of Azure Backup Server. What you can do is when you are backing this up, you can actually take the backup copy and put it and store it in the cloud. So this can work as an offsite backup where you have a secondary backup in Microsoft Azure. And there are a lot of reasons to do that, right? I mean, you would want to do that as your offsite backup, your DR strategy, or whatever reason. If you want to back up your on-premises workloads, you cannot, however, install the backup server, Azure Backup Server in Azure somewhere. So for example, we cannot today, as we speak in 2016, take Azure Backup, install in an Azure virtual machine, but point it to my on-premises SQL Server, for example, to do the backup and bring it back to Azure. You cannot do that, and it's vice versa. So if you are in Azure, your SQL Server, Exchange Server, all the things that you want to back up are in Azure, you cannot have this Azure Backup Server installed somewhere on premises and do that. So it's a hybrid backup solution, means you can be on premises and store the backup in the cloud, or you can be in the cloud itself and back up all your Azure workloads there. It's a hybrid backup solution, but you cannot install this cross premises or cross site as of yet. I don't know if in the future it's in the roadmap, but for now you cannot do that. So for our purposes, where, for example, I'm going to have a SQL server, let's say, or Active Directory server on my cloud environment, in Azure environment, where do I install this? If you have answered that we installed the server on the cloud, you're absolutely correct. I cannot install this on premises for my purposes. Okay. Now, there's an interesting question somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago, actually, is that what if I have a server? I mean, I have a hybrid scenario already. I have some servers on premises, and I already have some servers in the cloud. I have a VPN tunnel between them, site to site, and I'm already in a hybrid scenario. How do I do this backup? Well, the way it looks like by design, you cannot have the same server sitting on any one of the sites to do this backup. You'll actually have to have Azure Backup Server installed in two places and do the Azure's backup in Azure and the on-premises backups either on-premise or take a copy of the on-premise one and do it and push it in Azure as well, or copy it in Azure as well. And I'll show you how to do that. So yeah, that's a very important thing to remember. That's why I keep stressing on that. So moving on to the next point, both DPM and Azure Backup Services do not back up to the backup vault directly. And this is important. So previously, we have seen that all the backups that we were doing in Azure, it could go to the backup vault directly from the backend. The, the vault would take care of things. Okay. With Azure Backup Server, the very first backup you do does not matter if you're on premises, does not matter if your workloads are in Azure. You have to have a local backup copy first. So the backup is done locally to a drive or a share or whatever. From there, if you have a setting to actually copy to the backup vault, means if you're on premises, you want to make sure that you have a copy in your Azure, or if you're already in Azure, you want to make sure that it goes to the backup vault. It will take care of it by itself in the backend if the configuration is done correctly and everything else. So you don't have to do a manual copy to the backup vault or anything, just that it will not go to the vault directly. So the consideration that you have to make sure you take over here is that you have to have a disk attached or some sort of a media storage attached to actually store all your local backups first. Okay, so if you back up about 500 gigs of data every day, you have to make sure you have a local disk which holds that kind of data. Okay, so this is called a disk to cloud solution. So first, the disk is back up to another disk, and from that disk, it's copied to the cloud. And here, copying to the cloud means basically the backup vault, right? So your local disks are your immediate backup targets. So your backup folks, you'll understand this, what we mean by the targets. Your first target is your local disk, and from there it goes to your thing with your backup vault. And as we have seen with the backup vault previously, that your Azure Backup Service needs to be registered, right? I mean, your Azure Backup needs to know which vault this data is going to, because Azure Backup Server is a sort of standalone backup system as well for backing up to the disks. So that's one thing. One thing I did not mention over here, but that's pretty important to understand, is that Azure Backup Service does not matter which location it is in. It is a full service backup, but it will not back up to your tapes. All right, so there's no way you can actually point this to a tape target. So you have to remember that. If you want to still back up to tapes, you use System Center Data Protection Manager, because a lot of people might have a question that, hey, I'm already using DPM. This looks a lot like DPM. Can I get rid of my DPM and use just Azure Backup Server even on my on-premises solution? So I don't have to use two things if I want to back this up to the cloud. Unfortunately, not, because if you are using DPM with tape as your target, uh, Azure Backup Server cannot do that. Does not matter which location it is in Azure or it's in your on-premise place, right? So, and the next thing I want to also talk about is that Azure Backup Server does not integrate with System Center. So your DPM can be used for orchestration, a lot of other things with other System Center products. Azure Backup Server does not integrate with System Center. So that's one thing. If you have a requirement, you can't do today. I'm assuming the product is going to mature. And when I say mature, means when we install the Azure Backup Server, you'll see that it looks like DPM. In fact, a lot of places it is called DPM, which makes me think that they took the code base, they put the new functionality in there, but a little bit of polishing is left here and there. But as a backup solution, it works perfectly. Okay. All right, so moving to the next slide, and this is our last slide actually. How do you install Azure Backup Server? It's an installation, server installation, right? So you need a Server 2012 R2 data center. The reason the data center was, um, is proposed is because it already has a lot of prerequisites that you can put in the backup server. It must be domain joined. I did not check this without joining a domain, but I saw that with a domain joined functionality in this, a lot of features get enabled. It's easier to browse for computers and servers and everything else. You need a SQL 2014 license to store the data, but what happens is that Azure Backup Server comes with the SQL 2014 built-in license just for these purposes. So if you are familiar with some of Microsoft products, you know that you can only use the SQL 2014 license for the server and nothing else. You cannot even have other databases on the SQL server, and it will install it on the same server. It will just do it in the backend. Okay. You do need local backup storage, and like I mentioned, this is a disk to cloud backup. So your first primary target is a disk. So you need to have adequate backup storage to hold all of your backup data first, and you need to make sure that it's there. And you need the .NET 3.5 installed, and I put it in there because just remember, otherwise it's something it will screen for in the end. So you need to do that. This Azure Backup Server is out there for free right now. So you can just go to this link that I have put over here and download the server. And that's really it. Once you download, you will see there's multiple files over there. Like I'll show you, you have to download all those files, right? And I think that's all we have on the slides. And let's go to our client computer. All right, so I have the link opened up already over here. As you can see, it's Microsoft Azure Backup Server. You basically download all these files over here to one folder. And this is actually the installer you run. So what I've done in the back end is I actually have some servers that are already created. So once you go to virtual machines, I have 3 servers that are already created. I have a server for a domain controller. I just called it Ranger DC. You already might have a domain controller installed, or if not, go ahead and install that right now. You need a domain controller. I've created a server where I'll actually install an Azure Backup Server, and I'm calling this Ranger Backup Serve. Name it whatever you want. And I have a Ranger SQL server. This is not a SQL server that I have installed for the backup server itself. This is a SQL server I have just installed right out of the box to show you that how the backup server can actually do application workloads, for example, the SQL, okay? The actual SQL server is in here. So I'm just getting started with starting this virtual machine. We don't need that right now, but let's go ahead. I'm going to show you that how my domain controller and everything looks right now. It's actually right out of the box installed domain controller. So I've just promoted the server as a domain controller, and that's it. So I call this Ranger Lab. That's my domain. I'm going to log in here. Just make sure everything is okay. You can pause the video at this point and get your domain controller start built if you are already if you're already following what I'm doing, and you really should to actually check everything out. So it's a good time to go ahead and do that. While I'm doing this, let's go ahead and connect to my backup server as well. And since it's in the same domain, I have already domain joined all the servers, by the way. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, this is just my basic domain controller. Uh, let's see what's going on here. Just bring my users and computers console up. So it's a basic domain. I just want to show you that I have joined those 3 servers. This is actually my 2 servers, and my domain controller is here. That's all I really have. It's a very basic domain controller and nothing biggie. And this is my backup server. Like I mentioned, I already went in and downloaded those folders that we need in a folder called backup folder. As you can see, this is the installer and these were the bin files. To save some time, I have already done that. And my SQL server, it's up and running right now. I'm going to just log in there as well. I really don't have to at this point, but just to show you. It's probably still starting, so it's initiating. So we'll get back to this one once it's up and running already. Alrighty, so the first thing we need to do is actually we have everything in place, so we have to install the backup server. And it's quite simple. We basically right click on this one and go run as administrator. And the first thing, actually, I just remembered is that before we even do this, we probably want to go and get that .NET 3.5 enabled or installed. So let's go ahead and do that first from here. So once the server manager is up, let's go to the local server here. I'm going to go to the manage, add roles and features. Well, looks like I'm a little too fast for this. Come on. Alrighty. So I'm going to go next. I'm going to go to features, really. And let's see if I have .NET 3.5. Let's go ahead and get that going. So basically just install that. It takes a couple of minutes. Let's go ahead and let that happen over here. I'll pause the video. Meanwhile, I'm going to just go and see if my SQL server is taking its sweet time, is up and running or not. So yep, it's taking its sweet time. I did not give really a lot of resources to the servers just for this lab purposes. So let it do its thing. And we'll let this one install as well. I'll be right back. So while that's happening, I want to show you one more thing. In the Recovery Services vault, I actually have a backup vault that is already created. So you need a backup vault to be created, obviously, because you're going to communicate with the backup server. So if you do not have a backup vault in your subscription, please go ahead and create one by now. If you do not know how to create one, my previous sessions actually show you how to do a backup vault and a lot of more details on the backup vault. You might want to watch those before you come here at this point. But yeah, I already have a backup vault created. Let's see how this one is coming along. Well, it's almost there. All right, so this took forever to do. Anyways, I paused this and went and got some other stuff done. Anyways, let's close this, minimize all of this, go to the backup folder. Let's go ahead and run the installer this time. Click on next. Asks a basic question, where do you want to install this? We'll just keep the default over here. Go click on next. And it's asking for an extract location. So this is where it's going to extract all the installation files. So let's go ahead and extract that. It takes a little bit of time extracting this installer to that location. So I'll pause and come back again. It's not too long, by the way, probably a couple of minutes. All right, so the extraction has been completed. And it gives you an option to execute setup.exe. So it basically tells you that, hey, it's extracted. Do you want me to go and start running the setup.exe? So before we do that, let's actually go to the Explorer and see where it extracted, just in case you have by habit of clicking next, next, and finish, close this window. So you can go to Microsoft Azure Backup over here, and you can see the setup.exe over here. So it's the same thing as running this one over here. So I'm going to just go over here and click on finish, and I know that it's going to bring up the wizard. So if you're used to installing DPM, you'll see that this kind of looks similar as a wizard, but yeah, they just, kind of changed the parameters which have these labels and all that in there. So anyways, it has the DPM production agent in there as well, but we are going to go install Microsoft Azure Backup. So let's click on that. It's going to install some of the redistributable prerequisites. It's going to take a little bit of time doing all of this. Just let it do its thing. All right, so it brought up the actual backup setup. So we'll just go ahead and click next in this one. It's going to run a prerequisite check to make sure that everything is in order before it goes and does the installation. By the way, if you do not have the .NET 3.5, it will let you know at this point that, hey, it's not there. You want to go and do that. In our case, it says this computer meets the software and hardware requirements for Microsoft Azure Backup. Click next to continue. It's asking that, do you want to use an existing instance of a SQL Server or a new instance of SQL Server with this setup? So I would say that go ahead and install a new SQL instance of SQL Server, because your Azure Backup, first of all, requires a database. And the next thing is that we do not have another SQL Server that we want to use. We know that Azure Backup comes with its own SQL Server 2014 license. So we'll just go ahead and click on check and install. This takes a little bit of time because it goes and installs the SQL for you in the backend on this virtual machine, Azure virtual machine. So we'll let it do its thing. And when we'll be done, we'll have a SQL 2014 installed on the server and everything ready to go. And I want to mention one more thing is that, as you can see, that this requires a little bit of time. This demo, I've done a lot of work in the back end, like creating the virtual machine, domain controller, just to test SQL, create another SQL server. You probably can get away without that, but to see how application features are backed up, it's a pretty nice, what do you call it? It's a pretty nice option to have that virtual machine up and running. So give yourself some time for this session, all right? So it tells us the missing prerequisite SIS filter has been installed, restart the computer, and run the application again. So we'll go ahead and restart the computer, and we will restart this wizard or this installation once we are back online, okay? Because there was a missing prerequisite for the SQL, it has gone ahead and done. So the way to restart this, we'll just come over here. It's actually looking for an update and restart because that might be a Windows update there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here. This is the server, and we'll just go ahead and click restart here. Just give me 1 second, making sure that everything over here is okay. Cool. So we'll go and restart this virtual machine from the portal. You could have done that from the VM itself as well, by the way. Just that there are some updates waiting to be installed that I do not want to spend time on. So give it a couple of minutes, then I'll come back. As you can see, this is shutting down. Leave that as that way. It disappeared, the RDP window. So as you can see, it probably restarted. It actually gives you a little notice over here, successfully restarted. But I'm pretty sure it's not ready to be RDP'd in, so we'll wait. Alrighty, let's go ahead and try to log into the VM now that it's back up. All right, looks like we are back in, and we have to just go ahead and run the setup once again. So let's go to the C drive. We know it's already extracted and things were happening here. So let's go ahead and run the setup. Microsoft Azure Backup. Alrighty, we are back to the wizard here. This should look a little familiar from last time. Let's go ahead and click next. We'll check the prerequisites once again to make sure everything is okay. Click on next. And we are going to do check and install. Let it do its thing. And as you can see this time, after the restart with the check and install, it basically just gives you the next option over here because everything is okay. Now, this is where Microsoft Azure backup files are located. So based on your configuration, you may want to change some of this over here, okay? That where do you want to install the program, I mean, the scratch location, where do you want to keep the cache, the database file. So I'll just leave everything as default here. And you can see space requirements. This actually has the space requirements and what is required and what we have available over here. So we are actually not doing too bad, okay? We do have to attach a disk over here for backup, and I'll show you one thing over here that right now this one just has the temporary storage and the C drive. Like I mentioned, that you want to do the first backup in your local drive. So we do not have a local drive attached to this virtual machine. I'll do that momentarily when the time comes. But right now, go ahead and check these options if you're in a production environment and see what you require. For our lab and demonstration purpose, this is okay. Now, it's asking that, hey, we are going to install a SQL service and a SQL service agent. What password do you want for all of this here? So depending on your password policy, you can actually do this over here. End of the day, when you install SQL, there's a service account for the SQL service as well as the agent account that you actually provide. But here, since this wizard is going to do this for you, it's just basically asking for that. I'm going to go ahead and put in my passwords over here. I'm going to just say I do not want to use Microsoft Update for now and go ahead and install. So this is the install sequence. It's going to go to the SQL Server 2014 tool and workstation components. Once that's done, it will go and do everything else over there. Okay, so proxy configuration, I don't need any proxy configuration. Everything else is already there. Let this do the installation. As you can see, it's doing some work in the back end for this installation, and I'll let it do its thing. Okay, Recovery Service Agent installation has completed. Click on Next. Now, this is a very important thing. This is where your Azure Backup Server looks for your Azure Backup Vault. And the way this Backup Vault connection will work is based on your Vault credentials. In my previous sessions on Azure Backup, we have discussed how to create a vault, what are these vault credentials, how to go and grab them. So I'm going to go ahead and grab one right now anyways, so you can actually see how to go get the vault credentials. So Ranger Backup Vault is the backup vault I had created for this earlier. You can go ahead and create your ones. In here, we can directly go to settings or just click all settings over here. It opened the settings one anyways. In here, to get the vault credentials, we go to general and properties. Over here in properties, if you scroll down, you can see that it's giving you an option to download the backup credentials. Okay, so let's go ahead and download the backup credentials right now. Once you click on download, it takes a little bit of time, but you can see it went and got the backup credentials. I'm using Chrome, so I'll go in the folder, and here, that's the credential file. I'll show you what's there in the credential file real quick. Go to Notepad. It's basically just a key. Okay, so everything is in here. Do not touch this file, just leave it as it is. I'm going to copy this file and I'm going to go to my backup server, which I installed, and just go to, let's say, C drive and put the credentials here. Okay, so copy and paste on RDP will work to get the file in here. Having said that, this is not something you will just want to leave around, because this actually contains the connection as well as your secrets to connect to the backup vault, and you just don't want this to be available in your C drive. So once you are done importing this, go ahead and delete that file because you don't need that from there. You can always go and get it from your backup vault, so it shouldn't be an issue. So I put my vault credentials. As you can see, it went and registered itself to the backup vault, Ranger backup vault over here. This was the subscription identifier with 619. I know that this will match my subscription, which is 619 over here. So we are good. Let's go ahead and click next. Now, it's saying that anytime the backups are done, it's encrypted. So to encrypt the data, it actually requires some sort of a passphrase, okay? So you want to generate the passphrase over here. They give you a quick option to generate the passphrase, and you can save the passphrase somewhere as well. So I'll just do this on the desktop right now and just leave it over there. So whatever passphrase is now created for encryption is going to generate that, keep it in a file over here, and do all of that. So it's registering the server with the Microsoft Azure Backup. This passphrase as well, you want to store somewhere secure. You don't want this just up and running somewhere, because obviously you are going to encrypt and decrypt with this one, right? So this is the passphrase that was generated for you. So you don't want to just leave it the way it is right now. So let it go and do, so it went and did the Microsoft Azure Recovery Services agent. It registered itself with the Vault. It's doing a bunch of stuff to do the SQL installation right now. I want to come over here and quickly check something in my backup vault. I want to see if my server infrastructure, there was a backup infrastructure management server registered or not. So at this point, you can come to your backup vault, go to backup infrastructure, then go to backup management server, and you can see that this is the server that we just created. So it basically shows that this backup management server or Azure Backup Server has been registered with the vault. So I like coming over here quickly after that step and see if it is here or not. So it looks like it has been registered. So we'll pause the video and come back because this might take a little bit of time to set up the SQL and do its thing in the back end. So I'll be back when it starts the Microsoft Azure Backup setup. All right, that completed. And just for disclosure, I just want to let you know that this installation actually took a while, close to 20-25 minutes. I'm not too sure if it was because of the Azure VM it is on. I gave it good resources, but it took a little while. So just to give you a heads up that, hey, if you see the SQL Server 2014 part, like this part taking a while, it might take up to 20-25 minutes, okay? It took a little bit longer than I anticipated. Okay, so let's go ahead and close this. And I guess that's all is required, and this is done. So Azure Backup Server is installed at this point, and you see that it created two icons on the top over here. One is Azure Backup Server, one is Azure Backup Server Management Shell. So you have PowerShell commandlets that can deal with this. So we are going to just go ahead and not waste any time and start off this console over here. So while that starts over here, if you notice, this console looks a lot like DPM console. So people who are used to Azure System Center Data Protection Manager, which is Microsoft's backup solution, you can see this console is almost similar. In fact, when I go to help over here, it says about Data Protection Manager, Data Protection Manager. So it almost, to me, it feels like that they took the code base and modified it and added the new codes for Azure Backup Server, but they haven't completely changed the branding and everything else yet. Having said that, though, this is quite feature rich and complete, so it actually has all the Azure Backup components in here. So the first thing we're going to go and do over here is go to Management, and you can see that there's no agents deployed, there's no disks. These are the number of local disks that are required for backup. The only thing that is done over here, and this was part of the installation wizard, is that you can see the backup vault has been registered. So that's why it says registration status is registered. And if you can actually make this one go a little bit like this, it will show you the subscription. This is our subscription that it's connected to. Okay, so everything over here is fine. So I'm going to bring that over here. So before we do anything, like I mentioned, that this is a disk to cloud solution. So we first need to have a disk over here in Azure that we want to store the local backups in, okay, in the Azure Backup Server. So the way we do that is we are going to go to virtual machines. And I'll tell you one more thing that you need to do there once we are there. Go to the Ranger Backup Server. So this disk should be the backup server. We're going to go to the disks, which is right here. And in here, we are going to attach a new disk. It's as simple as that. Okay. So what we are going to do is we'll just call this, I don't know, just give it a nice label so we know what it is. It's essentially creating a VHD file, right? I mean, that's how you do this. It's creating a VHD file in the backend. Make sure you understand this number. This is actually in gigs. It's almost 1 TB. It starts off at 1 TB. A lot of us are not used to this high number. I mean, there are a lot of other wizards where it will be 1023, but it will be megs for a gig. So I don't want more than 5 gigs of data. Actually, you know what? I don't want more than 100 gigs of data. Okay, I'll just put that in there, 100 gigs. Depending at this time, depending on your capacity planning based on your organization's need, it could be 1 TB. You never know, or more, right? And don't forget that Azure only charges you for the disk, I mean, for the data that's written. So even if you have a 1 TB over here, you're not going to be charged for 1 TB disk storage. You're going to be only charged for whatever is there that is required for your data. So these are the IOPS limit, throughput limit. I'm okay with this host caching, no problem. Location, I'm going to just put it in the Ranger store. You might want to do it in a separate store depending on your organization's policy or requirement. It's attaching the new disk to virtual machine, and we'll just let that be. What we want over here is to come here, actually right click on this little windows over here and go to disk management. One thing you want to remember here is that for the disk management, we want this as a raw disk. By raw disk, it means that it's not going to be formatted, it's not going to be a basic disk, dynamic disk, or whatever. It's just going to be a raw disk. We are not going to even give it a drive later. We are going to just leave it the way it is. So let's wait for that. Refresh. Okay, so you can see the disk is not initialized, it's unknown, it's 100 gigs. It showed up over here, okay? So we are going to we just opened up this wizard just to see the disk has been associated with this virtual machine. And at this point, it's done. If this disk was required for anything else, we would go and initialize the disk. We would create a dynamic or basic disk and it would show up here. This is not going to show up here. And I cannot stress this more because the way Azure Backup Server works, or even if you did this in DPM, this is how it always worked. You want to leave this as a raw disk. So the first thing we want to do is we want to associate that as a backup disk over here. So let's go to disks over here. You can see there's no disks for the backup. We're going to go on the wizard over here and do add. Over here, it's showing that you have 2 disks. Obviously, one disk you have for your OS, and this is the 100 gig disk that we attached for the backups. So we're going to go ahead and add that. Could you have done this on the OS disk? Yes, if you had the right kind of capacity, you could have. But why would you want your backup data to be on your OS disk, right? You don't want that over there. So all we are going to do is adding the disk to the storage pool, and it's been added. You can see number of disks is 1, total capacity is 100, and unallocated space, everything else is fine over here. Okay, so we are going and prepping this for the backups, right? So let's go ahead, that's fine. Now the next thing we want to do is the way this backup will work is that it will need an agent to sit on the server that you're going to back up, right? So let's go to our SQL server. This is the server we want to back up. So SQL is already installed here, okay? And SQL is already, I went ahead and installed SQL, or you could install an image that already has SQL in there. There are a couple of things I want to do. I want to back up a SQL database. And the other thing I want to back up, and I did this in the previous sessions as well with Azure Backup, is back up this folder with two documents over here. If you want to just back up this folder with these two documents here, or backup shares or backup anything, you do not need Azure Backup Server like we have seen in the previous session. You can actually use Azure's native backup, which will push in an agent over here, which will be able to back up all this. The main reason you actually want to do Azure Backup Server is application workload like SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, and things like that, right? So we also have let's actually bring that up. SQL Management Studio. I want to show you that we actually do have a SQL Server installed on the server as well. And this was the easiest. If you have an Exchange, you can try it out with that. I thought installing a SQL Server will be more straightforward than Exchange, at least for my case. And that's all I did. So let's load this one up. Okay, so let's go ahead and log in. I don't even have any custom database over here, so I'll just show you what I have. All right, so it's loaded over here. Go to databases. I just have the system databases right now. There's nothing else going on over here. Okay, I did not even create any database. We probably could create a new database from here for testing, or you might have a database which might work out as well. So let's leave it like that. I'm not going to spend too much time over here, but I'm going to just show you different kind of things that can be backed up. So let's go ahead to our backup server. In our backup server, now what we need to do is push the agent to the SQL server. So let's go and do that from this console itself. You can download the agent and do the agent install on the SQL server or any other server manually. For our purposes over here, I'm going to just do this from here directly from the console. It's taking a little bit of time to show up. Let's see where it is. Nope, it didn't open. Come on. It's still a little quirky here. Actually, I just realized that that's actually bringing this console over here. What we need to do is click on install. Okay, so we click on install over here. It's saying the select agent deployment method. So there are two methods over here. We are going to use the install agents. Attach agents is for computers behind firewall, untrusted domain, and all this kind of stuff. In a work group, like you can even use this to backup servers or any application workload in domain in servers that are not on a domain. Since uh, we are in a computer or a server that's not behind a firewall, it's already on the domain and everything. We're not going to attach the agent, we're going to install the agent. So click on next. The good part about the whole domain thing is that it actually goes and does all these things for you, right? There are two servers there. One is a domain controller, one is a SQL. We are going to just add the SQL over here. You know what? I'm going to add the domain controller as well. So we are saying that go ahead and install agents on these two servers over here. It's asking for the username and password that has admin rights. So you need to definitely put in an account which will have admin rights to remotely connect to those servers and install. So in our case, it will be Ranger Lab. I'm using the same account. Definitely not the best practice. Use an account that you want to use only for this purpose of installing these agents. Okay. So this is the account I'm going to use. Okay, what is happening over here? Oh, okay. So it already has the domain. My bad. New password over here. Okay. So now it's going and doing some checks over here to actually locate these servers and push the agents in there. Okay. So the next thing is you might need to start the protected computer. In my case, I'm going to say go ahead and restart the computer if you have to while installing this agent. If you are going to push this agent in a production environment, I do not have to say this more. Make sure that this is done in a maintenance window, okay? Because just in case it requires a restart, you want to make sure that your other workloads are safe. So it's now saying install protection agent on Ranger SQL, Ranger DC. Those are my two computers. Go ahead and install. It's going to show you the progress over here and over here. It now shows the agent is installing. We can actually close this one. leave this one up and running to show that. I'm going to pause the video at this point and wait for this installation to complete to 100% and come back. All right, looks like the Ranger SQL is complete. Still waiting for the Ranger domain controller to finish. While this is happening, let's continue and get into the protection. So one thing for sure is that if you want any documentation on whatever we are doing right now, Azure has very scarce document on this part. The reason this part has a very, it has a different documentation is because they're pointing you to System Center Data Protection Manager. And the reason behind that is they're saying that, hey, this is similar, or this is a different realm of of a task that you can find elsewhere, not related to Azure at this point. So you go read that. So if you are going and looking for information on how to do things over here, because I'm just breezing through this, because a lot of this is actually not for 7533, but it's actually to get you up and running in a real production environment. So I'm just breezing through this for the sake of completion. But if you want more data on this one, how to tutorials and documentation, go to TechNet's System Center Data Protection Manager, and Azure themselves from the Azure documentation point to there to say go get the information from there. Okay, so Ranger SQL is done over here. Unprotected is one. We'll deal with this later. Let's go to the protection over here. So what you need to do right now is create a protection group. So protection group will be something which is a specific purpose, or you're grouping together a specific purpose with different servers for a specific thing. So this will actually make more sense when we actually do that. So let's go ahead and create a protection group, and I'll show you this protection group. The first one I'm going to create is going to be, you can create two kinds of protection group for servers and clients. For our case, it's servers. We are going to go to Ranger DC did not show up because the domain controller, the agent is still doing whatever it's doing in the backend. We are going to do the SQL. Okay, and let's wait for all that. We are on the Azure Backup Server, and from the console, you can see different things that can be protected on the server. You can protect all the shares. You can protect something in the volume. You can do a system protection like the system state or bare metal recovery, just in case that virtual machine completely crashes or that server completely crashes. You can also go to all volumes and create and get only the stuff you want for the volume. The best part over here, and this is why Azure Backup Server is so good for applications, is that it went and browsed your SQL, and it actually went and got all the databases that are there currently to be backed up. So if you actually had a my company data over here, or HR database, or whatever database over here, you would see them all over here, and you can just select one by one over here to actually back up that databases. So this is why you need Azure Backup Server for doing this. Nothing in Azure right now by default from the portal allows you to do this. So let's go ahead and say that I'm going to just take the master database backup. It's actually asking what protection group. I'll call this a SQL protection group, okay? Because I'll have all the SQL backups over here. It's like a container. Now, this is the main part, the disk to Azure cloud protection. It's asking select your protection method. So the first method we have checked, you can see that by default it checked both of them, is that I want short-term protection using disk. This is the disk, that 100 gig of disk that we attached over here. We are saying let's go ahead and do a short-term protection because it's a limited amount of space on the disk. And it's also saying I want online protection. So the online protection part is where it goes to the Azure Vault and stores whatever was backed up on this disk, copy it to the Vault over here. So this is what is happening for storing your backup data to the cloud. If you are on premises and running this wizard, you'd see the same thing. Okay, and we are in Azure, so this makes more sense for us. Now I want to show you one thing. Let's say that you don't want to copy this to the Azure Backup Vault and keep a backup in the vault. You can actually uncheck this, and that's perfectly fine. Because you are saying that, hey, for whatever reason, the protection group I'm creating right now does not really need backup in the vault, or this is a one-time backup I want to run, so I'll just do this over here. You can do that. However, I want to show you one thing. If you say that I don't want this on the disk, it actually goes and unchecks I want online protection off as well. Okay, the reason behind that is Azure Backup Server is a disk to disk to cloud. Means you have to store it in the disk first to copy it to the, or to have a copy of that in the Azure Vault. So this is very important that you understand that. All right, so this is done. Let's moving on. It's asking retention range. Well, these are the stuffs I don't want to go through right now. It's based on your policy for backups and everything else, that how long you want to retain this data. Full backup is 8 p.m. I'm going to just keep the defaults over here. It's now asking different things, the disk space allocated. So we are saying that the disk space allocated in DPM is this, whatever. It's co-located SQL. So that means the SQL is somewhere else, which is fine. Let's go over there. It's asking for the replica to DPM. As you can see that, all of a sudden when we are in this wizards or in this console over here, it keeps saying DPM. Like some of you might be like, what the hell is DPM? Well, it's Data Protection Manager. They took the same console, same code base to do the Azure backup, and they haven't changed this yet. This is so new. I'm assuming in the future, this all DPM references are going to be different when you install the Azure Backup Server. But for you DPM guys who are using DPM on premises right now, this is amazing, right? Because it's doing exactly what you see all the time. So it's now asking, select the data source you want to protect online. So we are saying that, okay, this is the one I want to protect online. Okay, so it will actually go to the vault. And we know this is the master database that we wanted to copy. It's now asking the schedule backup every whatever. So I'm going to leave this the way it is. It's asking for DPMs, I mean, the retention policy on the online backup. I want to show you one thing over here actually as well. If you want to do different times, like on a day, you can see that 2 times a day. You are only allowed 2 times a day as far as Azure Backup Vault is concerned to take that backup data and put it over there. Azure thinks that it's okay, and I think so as well. So DPM protection plan, this is fine. Online replication, I'm going to not do any online replication because I'm just doing an online replication over the network. The offline backup is stuff I talked about in the last session, is that if you have initially, like, let's say 20 terabytes of data to go initially to the Azure Vault, you don't want to do this automatically like we are doing. You want to do this offline, take a media, prepare it, ship it to Azure Data Center and do that if you have that requirement. But for our case, it's small enough to do this one. This is the summary, and let's go ahead and create the group. So it's going to go ahead and create the group here. I'm going to pause and come back when it's done. Okay, looks like our protection group is created over here. If I come over here, let's see what's going on. SQL protection group. It's actually giving you the details. All the recovery point and everything else over here. And you can go ahead and you can see that there are a bunch of things that you can change over here. You can stop protection, resume protection for both backups and everything over here. Create a recovery point if you want to do anything manually. Let's go ahead and see how our management over here doing. Okay, we have one. The domain controller disappeared for whatever reason. I want to check what this unable to configure protection over here is. Let's see the critical. This one critical. Some data source in this protection group has error alerts. I'm assuming that this error is there because it's a master volume. Replication over here. Let's see my disk allocation. So everything looks fine over here. Let's go actually find out in the monitoring what the problem is. And the problem is, oh, that actually makes sense. So looks like the account that I used did not have sysadmin privileges. So obviously the account that I used did not have any sysadmin privileges to do that. And really the way we would do that is over here. I assumed that it had sysadmin privileges, but definitely you want to make sure that it's over here. Ranger Lab, I thought it had SQL privileges like I'm seeing over here. Let's see over here. I'm definitely not going to get into too much details. I'm just curious. Master database, right? You would think that it would have this on the master database. I don't want to get carried away too much over here fixing this problem, but yeah, obviously Sean is not over here. So the way you do that, you probably don't want to do this in the master database, by the way, guys, but I'm just doing this for the sake of completion over here to show that we are doing this without any error. Um, so this is a little bit beyond the scope. Membership, I'll make this a sysadmin. It's already a sysadmin user, really. So this should work out. I'm going to pause and do this in the back end just so it does not take your time. All right, that fixed it. So the problem was, if you come over here, when I looked at this problem earlier, just trying to think. So can't see that over here. Let's come to my SQL server. This might help one of you if you're doing that. I had to add this account over here, NT-service DPM RA. This is the agent account that was actually going in and doing the running the actual job and doing that in SQL. But anyways, it's fine right now. I completely ignore it when I was looking at monitoring over here. It actually told which agent, which was the account that needed to be added. So I went and added that. But however, you can check whatever account you are using and put that in there. So this is just for the completion sake. I went and did that. It's going a little bit beyond the scope here. So the other thing I want to do over here was that was one protection group. This is the SQL protection group. I want to create one last one. Okay, just bear with me over here. This is also similar, it's servers, and this time I want to show you that I can go over here and take my backups. Remember that my backup file over here, the folder, I want that folder to be backed up. And this is what I'm going to call this as a folder protection group. Put that in there. Similar, everything is going to be similar. Just go next, next, next. Obviously in production, you want to go and get all of that. Make sure this is backed up in the cloud. Go with the defaults. Okay, okay, create the group. Alrighty, all success over here. Now we can see that there's another one in Ranger SQL where it's actually created the replica right now, but my backup, this is what's going on right now. Okay, but this is backed up as well. So I went a little bit beyond scope over here to actually show you that how this is done, and you can obviously right click on this and see you can stop protecting the member. There are a lot of other options that you can perform from here. If you want to recover anything, you just go to the recovery over here and it actually shows you things that can be recovered, right? So over here for now in Ranger Lab, which is my domain, Ranger SQL is the protected one. You can see there are two things that are being protected, right? One is the SQL, the master database that we were protecting over here. So it's going, this is what it's called application workload, right? This is SQL that's going over there. And the other thing I want to show you is the protected volumes. So C drive, there is a protection that is going on for the My Backup folder. In recovery, you can also see recovery points. So you will have different recovery points that will be created either on the same day or on different days, depending on how you are backing up your workloads. So you can see different recovery points over here. But right now you can see this is when I have done the backup and it's over here. And you can double click on that. You can actually see, you can actually go all the way to a file level to do a recovery. Okay. So when you do a recover, actually, that gives me an idea. Let's go to our SQL Server here. Um, let's see, this is done. Okay, all backup is done, all replica is done. I'm going to go to the SQL Server. Sorry guys, I'm going a little bit more in depth than I really should, but let's say my test2 document got deleted for whatever reason. Okay, come over to here to the backup server, go to my recovery. In my recovery, let's go back because I know that's not the case right now. Let's go back over here, Ranger, go to my C over here in my backup items. This item I want to recover. So go ahead and recover right now, just to show you once more that this document is not here. So let's go to recover. I'm saying that go ahead and recover that. It's asking that what kind of recover type do you want? Do you want to recover to an original location or an alternate? There's a reason you might want to do alternate. I'm doing original location. I'm going to say go overwrite. So if the file is already there, go overwrite, apply the security settings, do all of that. Bam, recover. And while this is going in progress over here, we should see this show up over here. My recovery document, it showed up. So it actually is working. Okay. So these are the different recovery points. I know that there was one created immediately. This was recovering from the disk. If there was one in the vault, it will show you it's recovering from the vault and do everything there. So this is just to give you a basic idea of how the Azure Backup Server is just like a lot like DPM, and you can use this to back up application workloads. So the most important thing over here was really this guy, that you can go and recover the actual database and not the entire server if you want to just get the if you want to just go get the uh, application workload like a Exchange mailbox or a SQL database and things like that. Okay, so this is a little above and beyond. Like I said, I really breezed through this, but if you want to see the documentation, go on TechNet, and the thing that you're looking for is System Center Data Protection Manager, DPM. Okay, so let's go back to our slide. And that was really it. So we just hit an hour. This session went a little bit longer than expected because I was taking some of these things I'm not going to get into. But I thought that if you want to start with this, some of you like the entire completion to see how from all the way from beginning to end this thing is done. So in this session, we went over Azure Backup Server. I showed you what are the prerequisites and what Azure Backup Server can actually do for you in Azure as well as your on-premise environment. We went ahead and I had 3 virtual machines already created. One was the domain controller, one was the backup, one was the SQL. Um, and for a prerequisite, please have those already created to save some time. I showed you where to go download the Azure Backup Server from and how to install that. The installing is a little bit more involved because it does install SQL in the backend to do this. Once the installation was done, I went and showed what a disk to cloud actually means, how we need a local disk to be created as a raw disk and available for Azure Backup Server. I went and showed how that disk is registered. Also, just to go back a little bit, during the installation, I also showed how to have Azure Backup Server connected to your backup vault through the registration process, and we went and did that. In the backup server, the other thing I went and did was push the agent to the servers. I just recalled that we did not do it in the domain controller, but similarly, you do the domain controller or any server. And if all your servers in the domain, you should be able to see that list and you should be able to push the agent. The thing that I wanted you to remember over there is that some servers, depending on how the installation takes place, may require a restart, and you want to do this during a maintenance window. And the agent installation does not take more than a couple of minutes, really. So we went did that, and after that we went and created the protection groups where we are actually looking at the workloads. I mentioned that protection group is like a container. In the container, the first one we created was for SQL database, second one we created was for the file. But the first one was the one that we really did the Azure Backup Server for, right? Because we wanted to do application-based application workloads backup where we do not back up the entire server. We back up a specific application workload, and in our case, this was a SQL database. It could be an Exchange mailbox, a SharePoint site, or any workload like that, mostly Microsoft, by the way. So you can do all of that from the backup server, and the power of that comes over here. The one thing I mentioned, and I want to repeat that again, is that this Azure Backup Server was installed in Azure VM because we were backing up Azure resources. If this was a server that is on premises, let's say my SQL server was on premises and we were using the backup server on Azure, we wouldn't be able to do that. Okay, so the only way we would be able to do that is if the SQL server is on premises, install the Azure Backup Server. Yes, this Azure Backup Server, whatever we went through the installation and everything, you do that on a server on premise and you do it from there. Okay, it's a hybrid backup in the sense that you have the backup done first to a local disk and then you back it up also offsite in Azure data centers. That's why it's called hybrid backup server. But hybrid backup server here does not mean it's supposed the hybrid connection between, so you have one backup server on one site and it can go to multiple sites to do this on premises and all that. So to actually have a proper solution for that, you'd need a different Azure Backup Server on premises, and that's fine as well. All right, guys, so this is it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. And if you want some more documentation on this, go to TechNet and you are looking for System Center DPM from there, because this console looks almost same and the concepts are still the same, so you can get everything from there. And that's what Azure recommends you at the present. And that's it. So guys, my training site is at cloudranger.net. You are most likely viewing this on YouTube. The slides will be posted at slideshare.net/Sean Ismail. My Twitter handle, emails, and don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn. And do leave comments and questions if you have on the comment section. So thank you for viewing, and please like the videos on YouTube, and I'll see you in the next session. Thank you.